Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the Malazan Empire and all the other stuff I'm talking about. By which I mean Deadhouse Gates, Book 3, The Chain of Dogs. Just like a really short one, the scarf is still not finished. It's also not getting much longer because I didn't get much knitting done yesterday. I had I don't know, another 5 to 10 centimeters, so nothing impressive right now. I'm sorry about that. I've not been in the best frames of mind recently, and that kind of fell through on the whole knitting project. But I'm almost certain we'll be done with it by the end of Deadhouse Gates, so I can start with the next project when we start with Memories of Ice in, I suppose, the next couple of days, maybe the weekend, maybe earlier. We'll see. Um, because the next one, book 4, is basically the other half of Deadhouse Gate, so this will take a while. This is part 1 of the book 3 remarks, by which I mean it is the book 3 remarks, but there might be more because I'm not sure if I might, forget stuff. I thought hard about the fact if I had forgotten something from book 2. I'm not sure right now. If I remember stuff, I'll just drop it in and that's it. But we start with talking about things in book 3, and there's a lot to talk about. So I guess let's get started. Cheers. All right. So things I want to talk about in book 3 today are I think 2 or 3 things that I feel are important to talk about. One of them is sort of something I'm not happy with. Like this time around, that kind of struck a odd note with me, and I feel like I'm gonna try to argue myself out of my dislike of it. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, a slight criticism of Steven Erickson. Who'd thunk it actually happens? No, seriously. Once again, I'll try not to, spoil anything, and I'll try to not do like a full-on plot, plot review or whatever. For those things, go over to our good friend Iskar Jarek. He's better at that kind of thing than I am. All right, so let's look into stuff that happens in Deadhouse Gates Book 3, The Chain of Dogs, that might be important. And one of them is quick check-in. We have, on the one hand, we have the Chain of Dogs, Coltane and the others with the refugees, and that's going to be the part that I'll focus on mostly today. And we have, on the other hand, we have other people somehow falling around in the middle of 7 cities in the storm and dealing with their personal problems. And we have Kalam and the refugee group there making their way to Aran and other stuff going on there. So it's basically 3 plots at the moment. And yeah, those 3 plots. But I want to first focus on the Chain of Dogs. And there we see something interesting going on. On the one hand, it's this is one of the most military fantasy parts of the entire series so far. There might be more of it, but it's very much focusing on the whole life of soldiers under pressure, and how pressure, inhuman pressure, changes people in a way. We have the battles, we have the whole rationing and stuff like that. There's going to be interesting parts in there when we talk about the killing of gods. Now we learn that, on that whole thing where gods mean something else in Malazan than I do in other in our world in a way. So yes, we see that there's the god of this one tribe that gets killed, or maybe not killed at first and then killed later. The rest gets killed later on. So yeah, there's something interesting going on there, in that you have beings of immense power, and you have priests, or you have other people that siphon off that power, or just get that power given for some purpose as long as their purpose aligns with the being that gives them the power. We have that. And that obviously means that you can then use, like, destroy the source of the power to then destroy the force behind it. And we see how that works. We have an interesting twist there with the idea of the more like shamanic, spirit-based magic that is going on with the Wiccan warlocks and everything there, and the spirits of the lad being used to like given a chance to come back in a way. So what we have here, and that's quite interesting because it mirrors something else that goes on with the whole idea of holds and warrants and the deck and holds as we saw it, as we see it sort of going on at the same time, both at the monastery with where Icarium and mostly Mappo discover those not tiles, but those things for the holds, and then we see the same going on at the same time, or later on in book 3 when Felicine and Heboric and Culp enter that soul-taken city, and also see that temple with the beast throne. Keep all of that stuff in mind for later on. By which I mean keep it in mind for like things that happen in like other parts of the country, by which I mean later books. I'm not going to spoil, just like keep in mind that this, while not being super relevant, like not seeming super relevant for the story right now, this will become relevant much later, again, like one of those things. But anyway, what I wanted to go back to is the idea that in this immensely layered world, you have like different times and things change over time, and even magic changes over time, and what that means in specifics, not something we're going to get into today. Like, as I said, there's already, I would link that already, the video that Cal did on the Warrens. Was that Cal? I think it was Cal, yeah. Cal's video on Warrens is definitely something to explain stuff like that, but what I want to get to is something that Stephen Erickson in like a recent essay talked about deep time. He was talking about mostly geology and archaeology there, but also the idea that you have older magic that is in a way more primitive than the current magic, and thus maybe more powerful, or at least like different, also gives this sense of like depth and this sense of age to the world of the Malazan Empire, or in this case to Seven Cities. I mean, we get told all the time that Seven Cities is this old continent that has all these old civilizations. We have those tells, those like mountains where like one city is across the other, is atop the other, and so forth, which you, as I said before, see in real life archaeology, especially when you dig in like Asia Minor and the Middle East. There we have a lot of those things. Anyway, so we see that not only like civilizations are layered when we talk about like they find buildings or find places where this is the case, we also see it reflected in things like the magic, where magic changed over time. We have this vast depth of time and culture and how magic changes. And this is like, I mean, this is super interesting when you're interested in more like real world study of folklore and folk magic and stuff like that. You also have the same of these like ideas that some magic is highly organized. I'm not an expert on real world magical traditions. I've read a bit because why not? But I would never call myself an expert on that kind of thing. But I've also read, because I hate myself, I've also read Fraser's Golden Bough at some point, and you get all these ideas of like folk magic, even though we'll of course take all of that with a giant grain of salt if you ever decide to read that kind of stuff, because 19th century folklore is something you don't want to necessarily trust, because it's very much interpreting stuff they find or misunderstand into ways that make sense to them, and we're talking about the 19th century, so there's like motives behind there. Did I say that historiography and history are two different things and that it's important to look at that? Yes, I did. So yeah, back to what I wanted to say, which is that even that in these things like Warren's holds, the deck of dragons, that kind of thing, on the one hand, and the spirit magic, the warlocks are reviving as opposed to the Warren magic, which at this point has become difficult for some reason, which may be a lot of divers and soul taken marauding through Warrens. So yeah, so we see this idea that the depth of the world has very practical consequences at this point. History has consequences all the time. We have that in those, philosophical small bits when Daika talks to other people about the craft of writing history, and history being the problem with history being that those people who should learn from it kind of ignore it or don't read it and don't learn it, those kind of things. We see the practical consequences here as well in that case. Another thing I wanted to talk about, there's a lot of humor. Let's make like the humor break. Like there's like these two things that I found super funny in book 3. One of them being the discussion about the magic items. This is probably only funny if you played enough tabletop role-playing games and stuff like that. But when Kalam takes out the rock and says like, "I wish it would be a gem," but no wizard would actually invest power in something that looks like shiny, so people would steal it. But there's obviously like cursed rings everywhere, and maybe I've read too much Terry Pratchett in my life, but if someone writes, yeah, there's magical rings out there, but they're all cursed, I immediately think Lord of the Rings joke, because I'm that kind of person, like Tolkien joke. Anyway, so I just wanted to say there's this like sort of meta level where people that have read and have been in the wider fantasy world find jokes like inside jokes there that other people might just ignore. And like, yes, the point is, on the one hand, obviously it makes sense what Kalam says there. No self-respecting wizard would actually invest power in something that is small and shiny and stealable like a gem or a ring, because you want to keep that power hidden, right? But on the other hand, if you ever read a bit of fantasy or ever played Dungeons and Dragons or whatever else, all the magic items are shiny and golden and whatnot, because you have this like idea in all our brains that valuable things have to look valuable in a way, which is obviously stupid, but that it's just in there so deeply ingrained that it has like jumped over into the fantasy sphere, I guess, in a way. I'm not blaming Tolkien here. He has other reasons to make rings magical. But anyway, just wanted to mention that I found that's very funny. And then there's the terrible joke that Daika makes, which, once again, maybe I've read too much Terry Pratchett in my life, but I was like laughing out loud again when Daika is walking there and there's a cattle dog running away with that other dog in its mouth, and the nobles are running behind and they're like, "Have you seen a rare Hangie's lapdog?" And it's rare? I thought it was raw. And I'm like, did you just make that joke? Because I make that kind of joke after 5 beers. Well, I also make that kind of joke when I'm sober, and people hate me for that. But it's like, how did that end up in this book? And yeah, anyway, I was going to say there is jokes and there's humor in unexpected places in the Malazan books, especially since this is like actually a very brutal situation, and we see something there. Humor as a coping mechanism displayed. We also see the same with, obviously, with Gessler and Stormy already in book 2. We saw that they are people that use very crude humor as a way to cope and deal with all the brutality and all the hopelessness and all the inhumanity of being a soldier in a way and being in these terrible situations. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that yes, those are jokes, and oh yes, you are also allowed to laugh. I mean, I guess you're allowed. If not, then just do it anyway and be a rebel. Being a rebel is also always a good idea. Yes, continuing on from there, the Hengis lapdog, the nobles. We come to my big grief this time around, and I'll try to first voice my grief. Not grief, but my issue here. And then I'll try to talk myself out of it, and we'll see how that goes. See, the point I have here is the portrayal of the nobles in the chain of dogs is extremely simplistic and more of a caricature than anything else. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mind that. I, as a reader, as a person, am far enough like on the left side of the political spectrum to really enjoy when rich, noble people get their comeuppance and are portrayed in a terrible way. So, all fine, isn't it? Yeah, well, I feel in a way that it's kind of going a bit far. It's a bit crude compared to like a lot of other situations within the Malazan Book of the Fallen where things are rather more nuanced. And here, the way those nobles are behaving is just like super, super simplistic. And as I said, like more like a caricature than anything else. When they don't understand their situation and so forth. Now, you could probably, I mean, you could, if you want, say that yes, some people react in shock by retreating into the pretense of their former lives, stuff like that. And you parallel the behavior of the nobles on the chain of dogs with the issues that people like Lady Lady Gayson, that's the one, and in the prologue. Yeah. People like that, people from a rather protected background, when they are thrown into a situation that is extreme, is far beyond anything any human could imagine, but even further away for them than for people who have dwelled in poverty and at risk of their lives before, that they then retreat into those rituals and into themselves there. You could definitely argue that that is exactly what's happening there, and I'd be willing to let that stand in a way. You could also go and look at the cull of the nobility and the hatred of the common people against the nobility that we are seeing at the beginning of the we are seeing at the beginning of the prologue and their march down to the slave ships. And we see it from the viewpoint of Felicin mostly, who does completely not understand why this is happening and so forth. And now we see the behavior of those nobles, and if you ask ourselves, if you were a rather poor refugee on the chain of dogs, or if you were a soldier on the chain of dogs and you have people behaving like that, and then you get, on the other hand, the chance of those people being like driven past you in chains to a slave ship for their crimes, which there obviously are, how would you react? So you could make this parallelism here and look at the fact that some of the rage of the general populace against the rich noble families, and we have to understand that this kind of nobility here is always a merchant nobility at this point, because there is no other nobility. They are old families. Old families obviously have money. Money stays in families and stays with the people who already have money. So that's why that's just a fact outside of the Malazan Empire. Just saying, old rich families tend to stay rich unless they really try to lose their money, which is obviously possible, but anyway, so this is a very rich and powerful nobility that mostly lives in their rituals there, and otherwise makes more money. And when you look at the way they are behaving for whichever reasons during the chain of dogs, the hatred against that group that then can be used and leveraged through culls by the Empire to cement their power base in the army and the common people is less, like, how can I say this? It's slightly less inhuman, or less ununderstandable is not a word. So is I don't want to say it's understandable, but it becomes less inhuman to look at than it was at the beginning of Deadhouse Gates. So that just one of those things to keep in mind. Now, when you look on the other hand at the fact that yes, people in those kind of situations, in those extreme situations, look for coping mechanisms, and going, like, sticking to rituals, and the privileges of class in such a situation is like must not let the manner slip. There's examples in real world history when you have these ideas that people are in the direst of consequent, like, situations, like sieges or whatever, and the nobility is holding onto their balls and stuff like that. There are examples. I don't want to, say that it's completely unreasonable. I'm just saying that some of the portrayal is maybe a bit. It came across as less nuanced than I was expecting, that I'm, like, used to from Stephen Erickson in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Especially that first scene where you have those two noblemen, the one who seems to be rather reasonable and smart and, like, more shy, and the other one who's super blustery, and then Bolt just takes both of them and pushes them out of the that's just a bit putting it on too much for my tastes. And I felt like that might have been handled better, but I would not know by whom, because I don't want to say this was handled badly. It just felt, it rang a slightly off note to me, is what I'm trying to say here, I guess. So yeah, we finally found a kind of criticism I have for the for the Malazan Book of the Fallen in this situation. Fun, ain't it? All right. I guess that was that part about the chain of dogs. Then there's what else? There is obviously a lot of, like, rather detailed military maneuvers, which is something I personally am not too much into, because I don't know. I've never played actual war games where you move around entity, like, different armies and stuff like that. So I just don't find tactics that interesting, is what I'm trying to say. They show bravery, and yes, I guess that's what kind of thing that I already said before. Yes, like yesterday, the whole thing about how Coltrane and that kind of heroism that is shown by the Seventh Army and the Wiccans. It's kind of interesting to look at heroism, because from, like, when you don't look too closely, this is pure heroism, and when you look at those battles they fight, on how they fight, on how they take all those terrible losses, and how they take all these terrible circumstances and, like, grow far beyond anything human. That's like this idea of pure heroism that is then, like, worshipped and put into songs. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I listen to a lot of heavy metal, and we're all into that stupid manly heroism there. Now, scratch the manly, because obviously the Malazan army is an equal opportunity army, and there's all kinds of genders in there, as far as I know. And but still, it's this thing, and what Erickson does rather deftly already at this point, because we see most of that through the eyes of Daika. Once again, the historian is the one who witnesses this, which makes it very interesting, and he's getting more and more active. We have him. He's actually wielding swords now and fighting people already, so how can he be a trusted witness at this point? How can he be that? But on the other hand, what he can do now, what he does do now, is actually show us the human cost of that heroism, of that, the bard in the tavern will not sing unless he's a very talented bard, and we know who's that going to be, right? Anyway, like, later on, like, stories will be made about that, and people say they are like this inhuman, unbelievable, superhuman group. And the thing that we can get through Diker as a historian who is actually active in there, we see the human cost of that. We see that they are not superhuman. They are not larger than life characters. Maybe apart from Coltrane, who has really shown that way, and I still have not come to a conclusion what I think about that. I hope that at the end of the book I will have an idea about that. But what I'm trying to say here is that Daika, as our viewpoint there, taking part in it, taking part in all these other things, is showing us the human side of it, is showing us the human cost of it, and by giving us these small human details, like this kind of stupid joke in there, or then his like interaction with that unnamed marine, and that's very interesting. It's also maybe the first time we hear about the idea of an embedded journalist in a military operation, as we then saw it later on, like in real world, see it in the Iraq War and on from there, where you have like the journalist embedded in the military union because you want to kind of make sure the results are the journalist reports are the kind of thing you want to be told about your army. And we see that danger in there, right? We see that when we have that second river crossing, and Corporal List tells Daika, now you go with this group, and now you have to turn around to watch this part, and so forth. It's very clear that Coltrane is well aware of what he's doing there and how it should look. And this gives like another interesting layer to the whole idea. You can look at that war and see that it is planned not only purely for the winning, but also for how it looks and how it works. That the psychological level, the report level, is also important, which is why Coltrane obviously makes use of Daika in a way. He also seems to confide to him in a way in that situation where they sit at the campfire for a couple of minutes, but there's not that much coming out of that. He's still playing a role. And so far we have not, that might just be the thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way with Coltrane. So far we have not seen behind the role that Coltrane plays. Anyway, those were my rambles for today. I guess there will be another ramble about book 3 tomorrow, because we still haven't talked about Kalam, atrocities, all the other good stuff. But I feel I'll split it up because, as I said, book 4 is super long. Will be 2 or 3 videos because it's almost the other half of the book. All right, until then, I'll leave you with this and talk to you real soon. Cheers.